Welcome everybody to AI Horizons. This is the fall 2023 kickoff of AI Horizons. I have just begun recording, so as folks continue to funnel in, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So for those of you joining us for the first time, this is AI Horizons. This is our Penn State's right now, it's going to be a monthly meetup of all things AI. So if you have AI questions or assignments around AI that you'd like to share, or if you're just curious and want to come learn more about what people are doing here at Penn State or learning more about new tools, this is the place that hopefully we can do that. Um, Meetings are going to be held to an hour for the fall semester. And for today's agenda, we have two special guests joining us. We will first hear from Stephen Hart from Adobe. He is our customer success manager with the Adobe tool here. And then after Steve, we will have Allain Daigle, instructional designer and instructor, who has been using Adobe Firefly and some of his assignments. So without further ado, I'm going to kick it over to Steve, who's going to
I'm just anticipating, I would believe that Econ 102 might be a prerequisite for finance.
Dak, you're going to need to mute everybody.
Yeah,
I'm just going to anyone, but it's always good to check. I'm just trying to anticipate any challenges.
There you go.
There we
Okay.
go.
Okay, so do I have the floor?
Yes, you have the floor, Steve.
Excellent. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming out this morning, virtually or otherwise, to hear me, among others, blather on about artificial intelligence, AI, and how it fits into the Adobe sphere of things that you have access to. Just a quick little note in terms of my background. I've been in a bunch of things, and what I studied in college, and I ended up to be a news photographer for quite some time. But I joined Adobe in 2000, and I've held a bunch of different roles here. One thing I'd point out is that a lot of times we're all getting bowled over with the term AI like it's something new. The thing that is new is in terms of what it does for us, the end user, right in front of you. It's new to the consumer, us being consumers of these tools, whether it's our stuff like Firefly, which I'll show you in a second, or ChatGPT, or whatever is a Johnny-come-lately AI tool. I'll point out, I studied mathematics and computer science at Boston University. I took a graduate level class in artificial intelligence in 1982. So this has been around for quite some time. It's just accelerated in terms of how computing power can deal with the amount of data. Before I show you Firefly and some of the functionality of it, I want to point out one specific difference between Adobe Firefly and others that may be in the space. We've had at Adobe artificial intelligence, AI, empowering a bunch of different things for the better part of a decade, if not more. It's been built into Photoshop. It's been built into our other creative tools. It just hasn't been exposed to you, right in your face, as opposed to Firefly. But the thing that Firefly does in terms of Gen AI and that makes it different, is the training pool of images that use to create the imagery. And why is that different? Because we train it on Adobe stock, which many of you have access to. We have the intellectual property rights for everything that is an Adobe stock. So we are confident that anything that comes out of our Gen AI tool, Firefly, or ultimately whatever else might be utilized, is commercially safe, meaning that the intellectual property is safe and sound for your utilization. And I'm happy to answer questions about that after the fact. So why don't I I'm going to show you a couple of different things here. I'm going to start in Photoshop because that's ultimately where all this stuff initiated. And then the Firefly tool itself, that's essentially a web tool. So I'm going to share my screen and hop on over to Photoshop and make this bigger. Okay. Ryan or Zach, you can see my screen, Photoshop. Is it okay? Yes. Okay. So this is a simple example I'm about to show you of AI in terms of a production environment or potential production environment that could be a lifesaver depending upon how an image ultimately is going to be used. Now, one thing I'll point out is that I do come to photography as a former photojournalist. So altering a photograph, amending a photograph, I'll say, is something I do with reluctance isn't the word. I would say with caution. And by caution, I mean I'm very clear in terms of what this image will be used for in the future. I'll share with you at the end of this my photo portfolio. You will see my photo portfolio. None of the imagery that's up there is altered using AI. This image, however, if I was doing a magazine piece or I was doing an illustration of something, is something that I ultimately might want to utilize the AI tools here. So we're in Photoshop. Photoshop is a sophisticated tool. Some of you may not have used it, but this is the starting point. I just opened up this picture of this truck, of this antique Coca-Cola truck that I took this past 4th of July in Massachusetts at a 4th of July parade. And I made a mistake. I made this image too quickly and I cut off the nose, the front of the car, of the truck. And this would not be publishable because of that. Now, normally in a newspaper or something like that, I wouldn't use this picture just for that very reason. But I can ultimately augment this image by just pulling out the edge of the front there, and then down below here in this new version of Photoshop, there's a contextual dialog box. Now I could type something in here. I'm not going to do this at the moment. I'm just going to leave it blank and hit generate. And what it'll do is it'll utilize all the image history that I've mentioned before, plus what's in this image. And of course, it will crash. I've been doing this all morning in preparation for this, but it's crashed. So one more time. Okay. Same thing.
We've all been there, Steve, in a live tech demo. It's all good.
Thank you. This is the first time this has crashed actually in several days. So one more time. And this is a cloud-based service. So it's actually going out to our servers. There we go. And it adds the front of that truck. Now, note that that house or that structure doesn't exist in reality. And that front of the truck doesn't exist in reality. However, I now have a publishable image for particular purposes. I can also skip through here different treatments. Every time you use our tools to generate an image, it will allow you to do several treatments. And there we go. It crashed one more time. But I'm going to open it up. I'm going to show you some additional things that I did to this picture, and then I'm going to hop out of Photoshop. So I am going to my files. And give me just a second. Here we go. There's that recent picture. And I'm going to make this a little larger so you can see what I did here. And I'll quickly show you exactly how I did this in Photoshop. So I added a Dalmatian dog behind the truck, and I also added a little boy in a party hat in the window. Again, using these same tools. And the way this works is essentially, I'm going to turn these off just to show you in Photoshop how I did this. I'm going to select just an area. Come on. There we go. What is going on here? Sorry, folks, I'm having a little agita. Okay, I know it. There we go. Okay, now. Oops. This is not what I expected. I apologize. It is stuck in the crop box. I'm going to skip ahead and go right to Firefly. So in the web tool, you have access to AI in two specific places. I can go right smack directly to our AI presentation, which is firefly.adobe.com, or I can access this content directly through Express as well, which is our web tools, which you also all have access to. I'm going to go right to Firefly here in the web browser. And this is the great place where you can really experiment with stuff. I can start with anything, just a text prompt to create some imagery here. And it gives you a ton of examples. But what I want to do here, I'm going to scroll down here at the very bottom of the text prompt where I'm at, and I'm going to say beach scene with a folding beach chair at sunset, and hit generate. It takes a second. It does the same thing like I was doing in Photoshop. I'm going to click out of those and well, there we go. All right, go ahead. I personally want to do a not a square image. I want to do a horizontal, so I can do a widescreen. I'm going to stay with the photo, but I can also change this to an art treatment. But I'm going to leave it at the moment here. Now, one of the things, as I've mentioned, I come at this from a photography perspective. My years in photography, I was a photo editor. So when I look at pictures all the time, I still do in my role here at Adobe and other things. One of the things that this does, and looking at AI imagery across the spectrum, wherever it is, whether it's our solution like Firefly, I think this is a beautiful example of my prompt, or somebody else's like Daigle or whoever. When I stumble across something that I really like, this is making me think differently about pictures now. Historically, I'd look at a picture like that. Wow, where was the photographer? Where was this image made? What kind of equipment or lighting did he or she use in order to make this particular image? What was the thought process behind this? I've come across some imagery now, such as this, and it's changed my philosophy about looking at photographs now, particularly if you know they're AI generated. And this happened just fairly recently where it popped into my head. I wasn't thinking about how, what camera was utilized, all that kind of technical stuff. It prompted me to think, gee, what was the prompt used to make this picture? What was the thought process that the person behind the writing of the prompt utilized? And that really made me think about the artwork in a very different way that I'm not accustomed to. I think that's great. To me, it kind of like clicked off this piece in my brain that I hadn't utilized along these lines. I just thought that was kind of cool. So I'm going to show you an important piece here, though, that we're also adding to our AI platform. And that is the embedding of credentials in terms of anything that comes from our AI solutions. So I'm going to download this picture by hitting the download deal up here. And here's what all our stuff when you download content from Firefly that has been generated utilizing Firefly, I should say. It embeds content credentials such that anybody who receives this picture or media, because we're not going to stop with just pictures, as you might imagine, will be able to ascertain whether this photograph, whether this content was an actual picture, it came out of a camera, or it came out of some Gen AI tool. So I'm going to continue and download this photograph. And now it's in my download folder. I am going to hop on over to what we refer to as the Content Authenticity Initiative. This is something that we started about 4 or 5 years ago in partnership with the New York Times and the pre-Elon Musk Twitter that has grown to a partnership of nearly 2,000 camera manufacturers, media companies, other software companies, et cetera, that have standardized, or we're promoting a standard platform to embed encrypted credentials into media that allow the content author to ensure that their content is credited appropriately, and then also that the recipient of it will be able to understand what's occurred to that media since it was captured. So consider that camera manufacturers, including Leica and Nikon, are starting to embed this technology into their cameras. So the moment a picture is made with a camera like that, that encrypted credential is embedded in there. Now, let me show you how this works. So I'm going to go to verify on that page, and it's asking me to select a file from my local computer here. So I'm going to go and find that image I just downloaded in my download folder. And there it is right there. And so I can drag it. I'm going to do, there it is, Firefly Beach. So you can see the content summary over here. This is really important. This is to consider. This is embedded in the file. It also has the ability to push this credential to the cloud. So say in this case, somebody decided really to take, well, I want to present this as it was real, and they scrub the embedded encrypted stuff. How could you do that? Well, it's simple. A screenshot ultimately can do that. But we have the ability to do image recognition such that if I wanted to see possible matches, see search possible matches here, it probably won't show because it's so quick. But it will match this image to what's down here and be able to surface that embedded credential as well. Let me show you another example of some imagery that I have pre-cooked here. There we go. So give me just a second. Oh, that's video. Nope, that's me. Lots of pictures of me. I use this for demos. I think this is yeah, okay. So here's that picture that I showed you from Photoshop with the little boy and the dog. Let's see what this shows. I'm going to drag this. And it automatically shows where the various sources of images came from. So you see the root image here. If I click on that, and you see all of the images that ultimately contributed to it. Right, here's the original photo with the cropped with the front of the truck, and all of these ultimately added up to this. I can do a compare, and see that here's the first one, and I can put this down at below, and I can see the distinction here. So this is something that we are investing heavily in terms of truth in media, truth in imagery, the veracity of content, because we believe this is core to the ethics of any sort of image creation, image manipulation tool. These tools, Photoshop and others, are important to be able to do these kind of things for illustration purposes, artistic purposes, and the like. But we also want to be upfront and ensure that they're being ethically used, properly used. I am going to quit this version of Photoshop, and because I want to show you. Let me get this going here, so it doesn't crash. Excuse me. Here we go. The version of Photoshop I was running there was a beta version, and clearly in sharing my screen, it was giving me the agita there. Okay. This picture here, what I wanted to do here, this is just a photo that I made right here at my desk. If I disable the mask here, you can see there's the background with the pole sticking out of my background there and the clock on the wall. It's kind of unkempt background. But what I wanted to do is knock the background out, which again, you do ultimately using Photoshop right here, and it was very straightforward to do. And I then asked it to fill that background in this particular prompt with a book of library of books. And then ultimately, it was bugging me that, the way I shot this selfie, so to speak, is that my arms were cut off. So I used the generative fill, in this case, like I showed you with the front of the truck, just to fill it in. And ultimately, here's that picture. So there's practical uses of this. Now, would I perhaps use this image as a, on top of my resume or profile photo? Yeah, maybe. Again, I'm pretty conservative in terms of manipulated images, so I don't know. But nonetheless, it's a good representation of who I am. And it's a practical utilization in terms of these particular tools. In Express, I'm going to go over to Express and show you where a lot of this stuff lives. And if you log on to Express or newexpress.adobe.com, utilizing the same credentials for Creative Cloud that Penn State has given you, you have the options to drill down into any one of these particular subsections. And you can see here's a generative fill, here's the text to image capability. We are just starting to play with other options here too. So for instance, perhaps I want to create a template layout for a newsletter. This is a template with space for photos. And this will do the exact same process. It'll go out utilizing templates that we have or that are in Adobe stock now, and then come up with something unique ultimately that you can use. There we go. And I can ultimately open these directly up in Express to add my own art, my own text, and the like. And it takes a second. There we go. So if I wanted to change this picture, I can, easily, do this. This is from stock, or upload my own content. I'm just, there we go. And just change the copy. So it allows the speed of work to really happen quickly. By the way, also in Express, which we've just announced and released as part of Max, which some of you might be aware of last week. That's our big, annual coming out show. The ability to translate a copy on any of these. So if you're creating a social media post and you want to be able to publish this in Catalan version of Spanish, I can do that. Right? Duplicate and translate. Another thing that we are just released in terms of beta, which I was just playing with this morning. I'm going to go back out to the front. Under the quick actions, these are things that we've studied that most people want to do very, very quickly with our larger tools, Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, our video applications. So you can see there's a ton of these options here. I'm going to click the view all here. Now, this item that I was just playing with this morning was pretty compelling. And when I'm done with this, I'm going to hand it with Alan, or perhaps open it with questions, 1 or 2 questions. I'm going to click video here. Note this one down here. Caption video. I am going to find a particular video that I recorded this morning. And this will take a moment. It's a short video, but it takes a moment to render and do what it's going to do. And while it's doing, I can't see a chat pod or anything. Ryan or Zach, are there any questions that are timely?
Yeah, Steve, we do have one question regarding the content credentials. Heather Brune asked, so for example, the case of a friend whose work was used without permission by Urban Outfitters on their clothing, this would be proof of copyright infringement?
Correct. So what you do, let me show you in Photoshop, by the way. We have this panel, content credentials beta. And I am going to preview what's occurred, what's happened to this image right within Photoshop, even before I save it out as a JPEG or whatever. Now, this particular one, I have my initial image, which you saw the selfie, the untitled library image. Again, the composite. There's another version of it where I took the Adobe logo and I put it on my shirt. I can also see my particular social media accounts and other valid, relevant information. And you do this by here, by turning on your particular connected accounts. I think I'm going to turn off Twitter. And in Photoshop, under the settings menu, there's the history and content credentials that any user can turn on by default. And any artist that is creating original content, I certainly would encourage you to turn this on. Why wouldn't you turn this on? And you have the ability to attach it directly to the file or publish it to the cloud, which is what I was mentioning before. Now, one of the interesting things that we more than likely will do in the fairly near future is allow administrators at media companies and academic institutions and commercial companies as well to enforce this, to turn this on by default and not allow users to turn it off. Now, this is a policy question that academic institutions will have to ponder on. But nonetheless, we believe that this will give media companies and anybody who's communicating content true power from the bigger brand. So anything coming out of Penn State, you could say, in theory, would have these veracity content credentials automatically built in, as an example.
Hey, Steve.
Yep.
I was just thinking about pre-registration. I mean, if you could tie this into the OSF, that would just be incredible. Right?
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So here's that video I was mentioning here. Come on, stop. This is pretty cool. In prepping this morning for a demonstration, I stumbled upon a beta feature in Adobe Express. Automatically caption video. Check this out. So one of the things, by the way, note it made a mistake. And I can get to that point. It heard data instead of beta. So I can go up here and just change this. And then open this directly up in the editor in Express, ultimately to add to, whatever I want to do. Again, this is powered by AI. Now, is this technically Firefly? No, this is technically built upon our foundational AI tool, which we've referred to, which we monikered Adobe Sensei about 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. I can't remember exactly when we built our own internal AI tool, but that informs us to how to do a lot of things. So for instance, yes, this is just still thinking there. That little caution thing is it's rendering. So I'm going to exit out of here. I don't care. Save that. All of these suggested quick actions come out of our analysis of what users such as yourselves use in Photoshop, in Adobe Premiere. We don't know who you are, but we know that thousands of people have utilized Premiere to resize video more than some other features. So we ultimately use that to inform what these quick action tools do. One other thing, but let me just show you this one, because this is the AI component in Express, leveraging our tool that's called Adobe Animate, or Character Animator. You might be familiar with Stephen Colbert's cartoon president when he was lampooning President Trump, and he'd have this cartoon of Donald Trump on set with him. The technology that they used on the Colbert Show is this exact technology. They used Character Animator in the desktop, the full-blown application, to do what I'm about to do. I'm going to just use the default, ultimately what came up here, and record a short little video. Hey there, my name is Steve. I don't have a beard, and well, let's see how this works. Now, one of the very quick little demonstrations I've done with this is, imagine a student or yourself, you're doing a presentation, a PowerPoint-like presentation, where you're making some points, point 1, point 2, point 3. Move the guy to the left here, finish the video that it's going to render here in a moment, bring this into the video tool, and add the points, point 1, point 2, point 3, as I've mentioned them in the video. Let's see how this works. Hey there, my name is Steve. I don't have a beard, and well, let's see how this works. Right, pretty cool. And I can open this directly up in the video editor. You can take audio from any source and place it in here in lieu of recording it like I just did. It also has the ability to enhance speech, which I did hear it right now. As you can probably hear, the audio sounded crisper. There was a timbre to it that my audio right now, as I'm speaking to you, you don't hear. So this utilizes, again, AI-based filtering on audio. Okay, there you go. Aside from my Photoshop crash at the beginning, I thank you for your patience on that. This is sort of a rounded way of utilizing or accessing the AI tools that are available to you. And I am dying to see how Allain uses this stuff in his classroom. Any other, just 1 minute, any other top questions while?
There are a few questions in the chat. Stephen, if you want to jump over to the chat and answer those, I think some of those could be a couple quick answers. We will have saved time for Q&A towards the end, but I think you had a great transition over to Alan to see. I can't wait to see how he's using it too. So Alan, why don't you take us away and share what you've been doing in your class?
Hi. Thanks, folks, and thanks, Stephen, for that overview. I've been super excited by what Adobe has been doing, not just in the last year, but the last couple of years to make technology and storytelling technology available to non-tech people. I come from a background in film studies, so I got an introduction to Premiere and Adobe, but you get in the weeds of some of those technology. It's not always the most user-friendly. So I've been really excited about Express and what that offers for folks who may not be as comfortable with creative tech. And Zach, would you be able to pop up that poll? I always like to kind of check where folks are at and what they've been using. I'm curious to know how many folks in the audience have used Adobe Express. Not necessarily the AI tools, but just Adobe Express in general. I've been asking this when I've done AI workshops in relationship to AI, and I'm always curious kind of where the pulse is. And so if you wouldn't mind answering that quick poll, I'd appreciate that and be curious to know. While folks are answering that, just a little bit of background on myself. So I'm an instructional designer. I work with Penn State Fayette and Penn State Greater Allegheny, but my background is in creative writing and film studies. Like a lot of knowledge, a lot of this is built on me screwing up and then trying again and learning again. Last semester, I was covering for an instructor who had to leave in the middle of the semester for medical leave, and so I was taking over creative writing class. In the first half of the class, the students had really focused on haikus. And so I gave them an option for their final project to write the series of haikus. And despite being somebody who was trying to keep on top of AI, I found myself at the end of this class seeing a lot of material that felt AI generated, a little uninspired. And so I found myself trying to figure out what can I do on a course level to try and build something that maneuvers folks and students away from AI pitfalls, from assignments that feel like they would be easy to throw into ChatGPT. And they often promote them. One of the things that they promote AI with is look at how it can generate a poem. And so that was a challenge that I found myself wrestling with as I began to design an introduction to creative writing class for this semester. And so I'm going to go just a brief visual aid on some of how I've been addressing both text-based generative AI as well as image AI in the course. We're kind of midstream, so some things we've started on, some things are coming. But I'd like to give a brief overview of what that's looked like, and then hopefully leave some time for questions for myself and Stephen. And Stephen or Zach, would you be able to confirm that you're seeing just like the part 1 short story screen?
Yep.
So I've loosely built the class in 3 parts. The first part of the class is kind of a traditional writing where students are creating a short story. What I've done, thinking ahead to the issues with text-based generative text, I've tried to scaffold this so students are starting with tool elements and building that up into a story so that I can track and see how a student is starting their writing, progressing it, and it's not just we're dropping a story in. And so what I have them do is they start by building 5 character profiles, then they're doing 10 object profiles, 5 location profiles. And then from there, they pick whichever one of these they feel strongest about. Again, this is like thinking about ideation. Sometimes your first idea is not always the best. So I've tried to give them a couple of different options and then say, okay, which of these do you think can be combined to make a story? Again, trying to avoid that scenario where we're seeing stories that are maybe leaning a little bit too heavily on ChatGPT or other text generators, and really getting them to follow an idea from creation, multiple ideas, into a final story. So the first part of the course follows this, where they write an initial short story. And the second part is where the generative AI is starting to come in, which is a multimedia expansion of their first story. So rather than a separate project, what I've done is required students to do a multimedia project that builds off of the world of their first story so that it has to connect to it in some way. And I define that pretty loosely. Like it might follow the main character, but it could be set in the same place. It could be before, it can be an after, but something that provides some continuity. Again, trying to find ways to be able to see a student's work over time and give them incentives to move that forward. And so they have 3 different project options. They can do a social media portfolio, they can do a web page, and they can do a podcast. And I'm really leaning heavily on Express for these options because it is very user friendly, and we do different kinds of training and workshops in class to talk about the technology. But Express, I think, makes this a more viable class project than prior years, especially with the new Express that launched over the last couple of months. I've been super excited to see the features in that. And as their sort of introduction to Adobe Express, what I asked them to do is make a book cover. This is a fairly low stakes assessment. This is not a course that's on, visual layout or typography. I'm really focusing on storytelling elements, narrative, consistency and continuity. But this was an opportunity to say, hey, you have your first story. What kind of book cover would you make for your story? And so we got some fairly interesting examples come through, very varied too, which I was excited about. Where students, the requirement was they had to use the Firefly AI generator in some way to build a cover for their book. And so I had them write the prompt in the comments when they submitted this, and also talked about their thought process. And so when I was thinking of how to assess this, how to incorporate it, it was really not necessarily looking at, is this a great book cover, but how are you trying to connect this to your previous story? What are your intentions? What are the things that you're trying? And I won't go through tons of examples, but a couple of different ones just to show the variety. And this is also where we start to get the students thinking about things like genre. And it's also where I start thinking about how the students' stories have some affinities with each other, because ultimately where the course goes is to have the students working together in groups based on what their story affinities are with each other. And so we have one group that's kind of fantasy oriented. We have another one that's like social realism stories, another one that's like just a bunch of wild crime. And so I'm ultimately I've started pairing the students, or we're grouping the students around their story elements. And this was a way to kind of kick off that process. Start thinking about the images, start using Express, digging into it before they have their full multimedia project. And eventually they'll come back to this cover, which I'll explain in a second. And so here is where I start to group them. They're ultimately working towards what I'm calling a storyverse, which is where each of them have this original story. They're going to have this multimedia expansion. And in the third part of the course, they're going to work together to figure out a way to make all of these stories connect in some sort of shared world. And this is how I'm really trying to emphasize editing, something that as we look at AI and text generation, I think is going to be an increasingly important skill. And so I'm trying to put it in a scenario where they really need to, are put in a position where they have to find complicated editing choices rather than, sometimes it can be a little bit surface level, or students aren't quite sure how to do a meaningful revision. So throwing them in the deep end and saying, hey, your story may not be in the same location as this other one. How do you figure out a way to make these stories connect? And again, in the same way that I'm looking to scaffold storytelling, moving from elements, building blocks into a full story, I've done the same with multimedia, where we're getting into the shallow end with the book cover. From there, I move each of the groups into a group style guide, which again, this is also something that I created in Adobe Express. I made a template that all groups needed to start with. And so the idea here is to set them up with a shared style. So that way, when they're working on their individual multimedia projects, they're starting to have a similar font, starting to have a similar color. So that way, when we put these stories together at the end, there's some shared visual language. And it's also an opportunity for them to try to synthesize and start to connect their different stories to, find common themes, think about what maybe the theme that they aren't necessarily aware of, but are starting to kind of synthesize and come to. So I've got a couple of examples, where the students are choosing some of the images they're looking to use, colors, and what I'll eventually have the groups do is when they move into that last part of the course, I'm going to have them revisit that book cover they made in the beginning. And now, after they've done some work on their multimedia project, after they've worked a little bit more with their groups, I'll ask them to revise it in consideration of the other stories as well as their shared style information. And so from there, they'll work on the multimedia project. And like I said, one of the goals for this course is really thinking about AI, not just in terms of the technology, but in terms of what that might mean for writing and creative writing more broadly. And so rather than an individual portfolio, I'm moving students towards this collaborative portfolio where they're going to work together, kind of choose what characters or what stories they want to revise, and figure out how to connect those together in a shared world. And so they're going to do the same thing as we might expect with like a writing portfolio. Focus on some of your writing samples, figure out how you're able to polish those, but working with other students in the class who are working in a shared kind of genre space, shared narrative space, shared visual space. So that way it's not just writing alone, but it's writing with other people, which I think is a big challenge, and something that I think is increasingly important and fruitful when it works well, and it can be really challenging too. And so that's some of what I'm aiming at in the third part of the course, is emphasizing the collaboration that can come through these tools, so that it's not just about the writing alone or the images alone, but how do you take an idea from the initial sort of characters and plots, take that through different iterations, work with other people, and those get at the same sort of learning objectives that we might see in a traditional creative writing course, but I'm finding different ways to do that by incorporating scaffolding, but also multimedia elements like Adobe Express. And so that's all I have as far as kind of formal presentation and spiel. I'm hoping to answer questions. I know that Stephen's brought up a lot of really exciting stuff too, and I want to make sure that we've got some space to be able to talk about that as well.
That was great stuff, Alan.
Awesome, thank you, Alan. I thought that was fantastic. I do have a question to kick things off, but if anyone else does have any questions for Stephen or Alan, please post them in chat or unmute and ask. But Alan, my question is, I may have missed this in the beginning, but what is the course you're teaching? Is it like a freshman level course, or like how, I don't want to say like advanced, or like what are the discipline or college of these students? Because what I saw was really cool, and I thought that could be really expanded to like other courses. I would love to learn more about the course in general.
Yeah, and apologies for missing probably that very important piece of key information that would have contextualized a lot of that. So this is an intro to creative writing course, and so I'm doing some things that I could see scaled into advanced courses as well. But I think for me, when I'm looking at these things, I'm thinking about like what are the learning objectives and what are the assessments that I would expect from an intro level class. And part of me is excited because for a lot of these students, they're nursing students, they're criminal justice students who have said that this is the first story they've written in their life. And it may be some of the only creative writing that they do in their life. I'm hoping not, but pragmatically, there's sometimes less opportunities for self-expression. And so I've tried to find ways to build in opportunities to play, and to also, if generative AI, especially Firefly, is really interesting from a representation standpoint, from a storytelling standpoint, to be able to, express really complex ideas or wonderful media elements without needing to be a deep tech person or a photographer. And there's obviously a lot of depth at that, but I'm trying to find ways to build that in as exciting.
Awesome. Looks like we have a question from Eric in chat. Alan, how much instruction did you have to provide them on using Firefly to generate these book covers? Do you have some write-up about that you would be willing to share? Eric is having students use ChatGPT in their writing this semester, and I'd love to add something like the cover art aspect if the additional load for students isn't too big.
So a lot of this was done as a sort of in-class workshop, but Eric, I think you're pointing to something which, like, as the instructional designer hat goes on, is super important, which are like, what are the resources that we can provide to faculty to help bridge ourselves and students with this software? So I can forward some things afterwards, Eric. I'll pop my email in the chat, and if anybody, Eric, if you wouldn't mind emailing me just to make sure that it gets in the email inbox, or anybody else, I'm happy to chat further And I think I also see that I see on Amanda has her hand up. So I see there's also some questions in the chat, but I want to make sure she had a space as well.
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, and that actually was my question pretty much too, so I could put my hand down. But I was wondering, how much time did it take you to get the students familiar with the technology and using it? Because I'm also thinking, because I'm also an instructional designer, and I'm thinking about you know, the instructional resources for getting an instructor very comfortable with using it, and then the time it would take, you know, to get them comfortable, and then getting students comfortable to using it. So I was just wondering, like, the feedback you got from students along the way as you were getting them into using it and things like that.
So for this first assignment, I had done like an in-class demonstration where we're working through talking about it. And since this is kind of their introduction, and again, because it's like because it's a storytelling class as well, and we're focusing on narrative, some of my focus is less on like image fidelity, style consistency. So that there's less maybe like image-oriented learning outcomes that I'm aiming to. One thing that I'm excited about with Adobe Firefly and Express, and I'll share my screen briefly because I don't know if we had a chance to see with Steven, is that it is a very user-friendly interface. So ChatGPT is primarily text-based, right? Where you have the text input and you can do some really interesting and complex things with prompt engineering. But what we're seeing with Firefly, what we're seeing with Bing is we're seeing like a more friendly user interface where you're able to toggle things that you don't necessarily need to write in, so to speak. And so it gives you kind of those nested prompts to be able to say, oh, is it photo, is it graphic, is it art? And so my mind would go to kind of walking folks through some of these initial user interface options, because we have the text prompt that the students use, but some of them are also doing some fairly complex things with each of these toggles that's a little bit harder to document. So that's a very long answer to say that I don't that I don't necessarily have the documentation, but hearing from both of you, I'm thinking that this is probably something that I'll probably build as the fire's hot, and would love to share once I have something like that.
Alan, if I may, along these lines, it's been my experience, not just in terms of the AI stuff and not just in terms of Firefly, but even, you know, the heavier applications like Premiere or Audition or Photoshop and some such, that as we've been doing presentations over the course of the past several years in academic institutions across the board, including Penn State, that it's been my experience and our company's experience that students are often way ahead of where the faculty will be, often, not always, but often. So what my point is that you might not necessarily need to embed that much of instruction in terms of how to utilize these tools. They'll pick it up fairly quickly.
I might push back on that a little bit, Stephen. And while I'd agree that there is some learning, I think especially I'm working with 2 Commonwealth campuses in Southwestern PA. And so the students that we're getting are differently prepared maybe than UP students or some of these other students. That's not to say that they're not capable and they don't learn fast.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I've definitely found that, you know, some students have said like, oh, I'm a grandma trapped in a 21-year-old body. And, you know, just because you're young doesn't necessarily mean that you know how to use these things. And that's something that I really try and be thoughtful with. That even though these students are hypothetically very digitally fluent, there's some of this stuff just came out in the last year. Even as somebody
Sure.
who's in the tech space, it's really difficult for me to keep up. So
sure. Equity of access and knowledge and all that kind of stuff is absolutely important to consider.
And I just want to put another, just to build off of that previous conversation. I have 2 thoughts to answer Amanda a little bit more and also to talk to what Alan was saying. I teach a first-year seminar course, and I've integrated 2 assignments that the students utilize Adobe Express. So I don't myself have any documentation, like official documentation, but I've built some sort of ad hoc stuff, and I found some online Adobe Express videos. But I also just did a quick Express tutorial in class, and they were able to pick up on it pretty quickly to back what Alan was saying, these students more often are digitally fluent now. Another resource we have here is the Media Commons here at Penn State. They offer Adobe Express and Adobe Rush workshops to students. So faculty can reach out directly to them and request a workshop, and we can run the class and the instructor through a workshop and get them trained on that too. So that's another resource that you can do outside of class as well for any faculty who's interested.
I put in the chat pod my email address. If anybody who's attending this call is creating content that they would like to show off or share, or just have questions about where this tech is going, I would love to hear from you. And my email address is really complicated. It's sh@adobe.com.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. And I will share this recording in both Alan and Steve's email in our Microsoft Teams space. So that is AI in the classroom. If you are joining this meeting today from the Penn State Today article, I do encourage you to go out and find that space. We will continue this conversation in that space. The notes, the recording will be posted there. We do only have about 2-3 minutes left, so we are going to end things here. If you do have any questions, I will stick around for a few minutes. But I want to thank our guests, Alan and Steve, today for sharing some awesome information and resources. And if anybody has any questions, please post them in chat or come to TeamSpace and we will get them to Alan and Steve. So thank you all.